And there are parts of myself I still wish I could change, but I see enough of myself to accept the rest of myself.
Mhm. Hello, my name is Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. So, there is one question that gets asked in this week's episode that has really stuck with me and that I continued to ponder even after we'd said our goodbyes and turned our microphones off. And that question is, how do you know when you have become the person that you're supposed to be? And I know that's a bit naff sounding and a little bit extra for me to ask, but at what point do you say to yourself, yes, this is the person I was supposed to be, rather than continue to strive and figure that out? Or is there a middle ground where you kind of just make do with who you are presently and accept that that's evolving? Anyway, it's one of those annoying questions that I kind of accept that there's probably no answer for, and so it's probably not even worth expending any energy trying to figure out some kind of response to it. But having said all of that, if you do have any suggestions or thoughts, I would be more than willing to listen to them, so let me know. But for now, why don't we focus on this week's episode, which is a conversation with Amethysta Herrick, who is a writer and host of the Gender Identity Weekly podcast. Now, Amethysta came out as a trans woman in 2022, but if you have ever had any experience of coming out, and I am making the assumption that you have got maybe some experience in that world, then you will know that it takes quite a lot of mental computation and processing to get to that point. And it's usually something that you know about a long time before you're willing to share it with the wider world. But luckily, we have queer spaces where it's safe to explore these things and go at your own pace. And one of the places that helped Amethysta explore and understand her identity was the bar Bone Shakers, which was found in Athens, Georgia, way back in the 90s. And it was here that she got to try out an alternate identity. At the time, she was calling herself Selena after the comic book character Catwoman. And she got to flirt and dance and try out who she was. And just to be, she just got to figure her shit out in a room full of strangers, which I think is what's so important about spaces and community. Anyway, now I'm going to ponder that for a while. But whilst I'm doing it, why don't you have a listen to this week's episode? Okay, so we're here today to talk about the 90s. There's a soft space in my heart for the 90s. When you think back on the 90s, I've said the 90s a lot. When you think back on the 90s, what are 5 words you would use to describe it?
The decade in particular, or myself?
Interpret it how you choose.
All right. So my experience at that time was as an undergraduate student.
A bit more than 5 words.
As a graduate student. I know, I'm going to get to it, I swear. Because what I was going to say was frugal was one of them. Because I had no choice. As a graduate student, I was eating a lot of top ramen and macaroni and cheese because that's what I could afford. frugal was one, and I think poor would be the other. Those would be two great words. And then if I were going to think more deeply, confused is another great one, because I certainly was confused. I don't, can I use a phrase? Because I was going to use mental health in some ways. Maybe those could be the last two, but mental health, because I struggled very much with it.
Sorry, I'm only laughing because you're looking at me like, I don't want to break the rules. I don't want to break the rules.
So I had frugal, poor, confused, mental health, and then, I would also say, and I don't know how I want to put it, it was rife with opportunity. And I knew that was going to be my launching pad, I don't have a good word for it, not a single word. It was my launching pad. It was my launch. How about that?
What was your launch? The 90s or being a student?
The 90s were, because I was born in 1970. So the 90s were as I was coming into adulthood and learning really who I was and how that was going to express itself for the rest of my life, or so I thought. It was like there was an arch and I could see this bright light beyond it. And I think, oh my gosh, yes, this will be so great. This is my taking off. I'm becoming. There we go. That's the word I want to use.
Ooh, becoming.
I was becoming. I love that word because the word is used all over in the 9 Inch Nails EP, which was Broken, and then is all over in The Downward Spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Trent Reznor says, I am becoming in several places. And that made a huge impact on me because I always thought, someday I will become. I think I did it.
Become yourself?
Yes. Become myself. It's a hard process. A lot of what I've written about, I suppose I could make that clear. So I'm a writer now, although I began life as a scientist. Much of what I write about now, particularly from the lens of the transgender experience, is us figuring out who we are and why we are who we are. And that's something that's really driven me, the word why, that is something that's really driven me my whole life. It's why I went into science. It's why I ended up going into software, why I went into management. It's why I do what I do now. Why are we who we are?
So this might be going a little too deep too quickly, but I'm just going to roll with the punches of my brain's little quirks. In becoming yourself, how do you know when you've arrived?
Oh, gosh. I have two answers. I have two answers for pretty much everything, you'll find. Because I think the first answer is simply to say, when it feels right. And then I think a natural response to when it feels right is, yeah, but I feel great today. What if I feel terrible tomorrow? And I would say that happens because identity is not a destination. It can never be a destination. As we learn about ourselves and as we learn about the universe, and as we learn about how we also fit into the universe, we're continually understanding ourselves and our social environment better. And that means becoming always changes. It always has to change. The quick answer is when you feel right, but the longer term answer is when it feels right most of the time, which is a little cagey, I get it, but a little squidgy.
Well, like picking up on your favorite word, why? I'm going to be like a bratty 3-year-old today, I think. So sorry. Why?
Great.
Why? But why? If it's constantly evolving, then how do you know you've become?
Because I said I have become earlier?
Yeah.
So that's the question?
Yeah.
I have become because early on in my writing career, I was going through my own gender transition. The question I saw very frequently in the transgender community is, first of all, am I trans enough? That's the big, do I deserve to be in this community? But then also, how do I know when I've finished transition? And I thought about this question for a long, long time. And I don't even think it took, because I started thinking about that at the beginning of 2022. I don't remember exactly when I wrote this article, but there was an article in which I wrote, I will have effected a successful gender transition when I can look in the mirror and see enough of myself to accept the rest of myself. And I don't know if I speak for all of humanity or if I speak primarily of the transgender experience. Being able to accept the rest of yourself because you can see enough of yourself is very difficult. It was for me. And now I look in the mirror. I mean, I have this idea that every cisgender person has looked in the mirror their entire lives and gone, oh yeah, no, that's totally who I am. It's probably not true. It's probably untrue. But I now can look in the mirror and I can look around me and I can see my social environment, my role in my family, my relationship with my son, my relationship with my wife. And when I go to the restroom, gosh, this took a sudden downturn, but when I go and I see myself in a mirror, I see enough of who I know I am. And there are parts of myself I still wish I could change, but I see enough of myself to accept the rest of myself. And that's my answer. I know I've become, even though it's a moving target, because consistently I can go and see enough of myself. At some point, if that changes, then I know I've got to make changes myself. I got to make changes to what I'm doing, whatever that might be.
So I feel bad to do this, but let's go back to the 90s before you became what you became.
Please.
But that was a really lovely answer. Thank you. And I always sound like I'm being insincere. Sorry, I just can't not. Anyway, so the 5 words that you played back to me before were frugal, poor, confused, mental health, which, I'm allowing, even though it's 2 words, and becoming.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
So there was, in very simple terms, there were the 2 sides. There was depression, a confusion. I've applied the word depression. Sorry, that's probably too strong a word. There was tumultuousness, but then there was also faith and hope that you would make it out to the other side. Is that a fair statement to make?
I admit I had not considered that there was faith or confidence or hope because it was an extremely dark period for me. I mean, you used the word depression. I was very, very depressed. I mentioned mental health because I've suffered my entire life with voices in my head. But I had a lot of dissociative episodes, a lot of delusions or several delusions. As far as dissociative episodes go, there were many times I would wake up and somebody would call me, or I saw somebody the next day and this person would say, I really didn't like what you said to me yesterday. And I would say, okay, I stayed in my house the whole time. They said, no, we met at this bar and you called me something or you said something. And I would go, shoot, really? Because my memory is I was at home. And the person would go, because it was relatively well known that I would do these things. And people would go, oh, okay. All right, fair enough. I never wanted to use that as like a free pass to get really drunk and just really go off on somebody. You are the biggest wanker on the planet. And then the next day have them go, you called me a wanker. And I'll go, what? No, I didn't. But your question, sorry, reeling it back in. It seems like a dichotomy. It's an odd place to be that I was in a very dark place. And yet it seemed like there was an archway with a bright light behind it. I think it may also be a common experience for transgender people always to see becoming in the future, at least until you begin transition. And I'm extrapolating a little bit, kind of a lot. But growing up, I always apologized for being young, for being a kid. I was too young. I wasn't in high school. And then I apologized. I wasn't in college. I hadn't finished, college. I hadn't gone to graduate school. Okay, finally, I've finished graduate school. Now I'm supposed to know everything because you have a PhD. You do, right? That's actually common knowledge. You get a PhD, you know everything. It's wholly untrue, by the way. Anybody with a PhD who says, yeah, I'm totally intelligent, you go, well, okay, take that degree right back. But I continued to apologize. I continued for not becoming. It was always in the future. And so the dichotomy there comes from this idea that while I have been in a dark place for a very long time, I still believe that there is, you used the word hope, and I feel kind of like a Pollyanna saying this, but I think that's the right word. There's always been a sense of hope. Gosh, this is an epiphany, frankly. I never thought of myself as an optimistic person, and I'm now ticking over what you've said, and I go, yeah, I guess that's true.
Oh no, we don't like optimism here.
I know. Well, okay, I can follow this up with saying during the 90s, I also had several suicide attempts.
Okay, maybe that's a bit too far to the left. Which can we just go?
Damn. I'll try to let me reel that one back in. Not too optimistic, not too pessimistic. During the 90s, I thought things were, yeah, okay.
Okay, episode done. That's it. No, okay. So you were a student in the 90s. You were living in Athens.
Yes.
Are you from Athens?
No, I grew up in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And then I did my undergraduate work in San Diego. And those are I'll lean into this. Because here's what I was going to say. I was going to say 2 of the biggest cities in the world. And then I thought, I don't know the truth or falsehood of that. Because being American, we are trained. You don't need to know that kind of crap, right? That's like the rest of the world. They don't really exist. So I apologize, rest of the world, but LA and San Diego, pretty big places to me. And then I moved to small town Georgia in the United States in the deep South. It might have been more interesting to move to Georgia in like Eastern Europe, right? I don't know.
Or Athens in Greece, yeah.
Or Athens, Greece, right? Could you imagine? So small town, Athens, Georgia. I cannot tell you the sense of culture shock I experienced. I was used to millions of people being around, driving everywhere, every other Los Angeles, idiosyncrasy you can think of that you see in a movie and you go, people don't really live like that. Yeah, yes. I went to Georgia and it was completely different. It was a huge culture shock. So I'm not from Athens, and they were well aware of it.
So what were those first days there like? Did you know anyone?
No. Yes, because I went there to go to graduate school, and the person who actually picked me up from the airport was my graduate advisor. So I knew him, but I showed up with a suitcase, and I used UPS. I had shipped all of my possessions across the country, and it was starting over. There was a huge benefit to that, though, because I was starting over. I thought that when I moved from Los Angeles to San Diego, that everything I knew about myself could just be left behind. And I mentioned, I've had dissociative episodes, and so I thought it would be really easy. I can just package all that up, every bit of Los Angeles, throw it over my shoulder, and I'm finished. Move to San Diego, I can be a new person. And it was mostly true. Not entirely true, because I had a sister who moved to San Diego not too long after I did, and I was still close enough to Los Angeles to visit that I couldn't be the person I would have chosen to be if I could just start over. But I moved to Athens, Georgia, and they were so aware that I was alien in some way. I thought, again, I'll lean into this. And I decided to be every single thing that I wanted to be, that I knew I was.
So at that time, what does that look like?
I remember this experience, and I don't know why it stands out in my head. I mean, I guess when I tell you, you'll go, yeah, actually, that probably would stand out. But I remember waking up on a weekend, and I looked out my window at this blue Georgia sky, which is not the same blue as Southern California. It's a weird thing. I don't know if it's like an astronomical sort of anomaly, but just trust me. Georgia looks
So
different
like a
for us.
lighter blue, a darker blue? What are we talking
It
about?
is. It's a lighter blue.
Okay, all right.
It's a lighter blue, and it's almost hazy. It's less. When I'm in California, which isn't often because I don't really care for it anymore, but when I'm in California, I can look up and go, gosh, look at this very deep, very, I don't have a better word. It's like a profound blue, like a hyper intelligent shade of blue.
But in Georgia, it's just meh, so blue.
Certainly, yeah, it certainly isn't hyper intelligent because, ooh, that was a bit below the belt. I'm sorry, Georgia. You're okay, but don't come after me just yet. Let me finish this interview.
You'll have plenty to come at her for. Don't you worry, listener.
Oh, they do. So many things to come after me. In any event, when I remember looking out the window, and I don't know what caused it, but I had this epiphany, this revelation. I said, oh my gosh, I like men and I like women. There's a word for that. It's bisexual. I am bisexual. And I went, wow, God, that's just amazing. And shortly, following on that bit of revelation, I went, oh my gosh, and I know why that is. Because I am both woman and man. And that word is shit. I didn't have a word. I didn't have a word, but I accepted right then, sometime in 1994, in Athens, Georgia, lying in bed, looking at the ugly sky, beautiful blue sky, realizing I am both pansexual and transgender. I called myself bisexual at the time, and I also assumed that being attracted to men and women comes from a sex or a gender, and I've since, moved on from that. I just want to make that clear. But it was a moment of acceptance that I didn't anticipate, and it hit me very hard. And then I just started acting it out.
Was it a bolt out of the blue? Was there nothing that led up to that epiphany?
It was not a bolt out of the blue. What was the bolt was my acceptance.
Okay.
Because growing up, so I grew up in the 1970s, the 1980s. It was well known, of course, that AIDS was a gay disease. If you were straight, you can't get it, right? We all knew this. And so being gay was a bad thing. Being bisexual would be even weirder, because why can't you just make a choice? Why is that so hard? Being transgender was even more foreign. I remember, it was early 80s. I heard a joke about somebody having a Swedish vacation. And I don't know if Sweden had just approved some sort of gender reassignment surgery, some sort of gender affirming care. But the joke that I had heard is that this guy had gone to Sweden. He was gone for 2 weeks, came back a woman, came back a she. And I remember thinking to myself, I went, gosh, how much do you think it costs to get a ticket to Sweden? Because I would go there. I would do that.
And only 2 weeks. It's not bad.
I know, 2 weeks is pretty impressive. But that was my thought at the time. And even though it was always in the back of my head, even though I had dressed up in my sister's clothes, I had dressed up in significant others' clothes, girlfriends' clothes, it was not until that moment that I thought, this is okay.
So then, in jumping a few steps back, and this is one of those questions that it's probably impossible to respond to because I'm asking you to put yourself in the headspace of who you were at that time, but just go with me.
Sure.
You said leaving Los Angeles and going to San Diego was viewed as this opportunity to leave all of that behind and become something else.
Right.
What in your mind were you leaving behind at that point if you hadn't had this conversation with yourself then?
I'm unsure. I was going to, I'll lean into it, okay?
Okay.
What I was leaving behind was the pain and all the suffering of those first 18 years. And I thought I will start over with no pain, no guilt, no shame, no suffering, no nothing that would remind me of growing up and being attracted to men being bad, or wanting to dress as a woman being bad, that I could go to San Diego and all of those aspects of me would be
Mm-hmm.
accepted. And not only accepted, but celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get that until this reinvention. I don't want to use the word reinvention, but recognition that I had always been that person.
Ah, okay. So this moment in the bed, looking up at that murky, disgusting blue sky, were you...
Lovely.
I've never been to Georgia, by the way, everyone. Just, oh no, I have been to Georgia. Oh shit. Well, I don't have any views on the sky in Georgia. Anyway, so when you were looking up at the sky and you had this epiphany, it was a convergence of all of the thoughts that you'd been suppressing. It doesn't seem like you were suppressing them, though.
It was not suppressing. I think what I did, there are times I think in many humans' lives when they do something and they go, oh gosh, I can't believe, oh dang, I can't believe I did that. And you apologize and you over and over and you think, gosh, what a horrible person I am. And then you find out later on, whatever it was you did, whatever you said, whatever it was, made no difference to the person you thought you affected. And you have this very sudden ability to offload all of your sorrow, all of your guilt, whatever all those bad feelings are. You have the ability right then just to go, oh, I can drop this luggage off and I don't need to carry it with me anytime. And I think that's what I did, is I dropped the shame of feeling pansexual. I dropped the shame of knowing inside I was a woman. It still took years to process exactly what both of those meant, but there is a very common, this is very common transgender experience, a sense of shame that I was born a certain way and I'm not supposed to be something different. And so many transgender people, as they move toward this idea of maybe someday I will transition gender, one of the biggest obstacles to surmount is that feeling of guilt. Because it seems we want to protect the world. We want to protect the rest of the world from these feelings inside us. We don't want the rest of the world to have to deal with this woman who's a man, but is a woman, but could be male, but might really feel female. And it's weird. And we think we need to keep the rest of the world from knowing this person. And so a huge part of that journey is being able to say, I don't have to protect the world. This guilt and this shame, I can just drop it off somewhere because I never was meant to carry it. Because being who we are is normal. We are who we are, and that's just kind of who we are. We have no reason to apologize for the person we are inside. And that's what I did. I thought when I left Los Angeles, I'd be able to stop apologizing. When I left San Diego, I thought I'll be able to stop apologizing. And I had that moment, that Saturday or Sunday morning, that weekend morning, when I looked out the window and said, ooh, I don't have to apologize. And so my gender and my sexuality have been very clear to me since I was 24, 24 years old.
And you had this moment, you recognized this about yourself, and then you were like, right, off I go.
Yes.
And where might you have gone on this journey? Could it have been Bone Shakers?
So I actually looked this up because I was curious when it opened. I thought it opened in 1994, and it turns out the place opened in 1993. So in Athens, Georgia, the only gay bar in town, Bone Shakers. And I don't even know how I heard about it. at this point. Somehow somebody invited me to go to Bone
Also,
Shakers.
the name. Do you know what the background to the name is? Just before we get into this story.
I
Because is
don't.
it bone as
No,
in
I
like
don't. I wish I
boner?
did.
No. Okay, let's not.
I
Yeah,
wondered.
you found out about it, you went. So
But
carry on the story.
So my assumption, for what it's worth, because it was a gay bar, is that yes, it was a place where gay men could get excited as they were dancing. There was a boner, you were shaking, dancing. That was always my understanding.
Okay, good. I'm glad that your brain is in the gutter with my brain.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh, yes. Absolutely. If I understand correctly, the person who opened the bar is a lesbian. So now I got to throw that all
But
out.
maybe she just didn't really understand because you don't really shake your boner.
No?
Or is there a new dance move I can create here?
I'm going to indulge that rapidly diminishing masculine side of myself. If you do that, it's painful.
Well,
And maybe that's why a lesbian came up with it. She goes, I have no idea. Presumably gay men shake their bones, and that probably doesn't hurt. Right?
yeah, depends what angle your boner is at, I suppose. There's a lot of variables.
And how
Yeah,
old you
yeah.
are. I mean, right. The momentum, how quickly are you going here? What's the angle of gyration? I mean, there's a lot of variables. Where's the moon phase?
But it does feel like this could be a new dance craze that I could spearhead.
Oh, you could. Oh, yes. If you do that on TikTok, I just want to tell you now, I'm not going to join in. I haven't yet completed, the procedure not to be able to join in, but I certainly don't want that aspect of myself publicized.
What are you saying about my high art creation? Anyway, we shouldn't have to talk about this. Let's talk about you going to Bone
No,
Shakers
we
for the first
shouldn't. You're
time.
right. It's a good point. So I went to Bone Shakers, and for what it's worth, I don't, this is another goofy cliche, but I walked into that building and I went, oh my gosh, these are my people.
Immediately,
yes.
wow.
It was a sense of, I don't want to say homecoming, because again, the bunch of cliches that I will come up with, the energy was just right. There was an overlap of energy that I just went, oh my gosh, this is who I am. And I'm going to guess, I don't know for certain, but I'm going to guess that when I went there the first time, I was probably dressed as Selena. So I had dressed up, and at the time, my hair was waist length. I mean, you can see it's wavy here. When I was younger, it was a little curlier, actually. So it was waist length. It was dyed blue-black because I was very pale, it was very tragic, very gothic. And I would have been wearing tons of eyeliner and maybe black lipstick. I also had this great blood red lipstick that went very well. And I walked in there and just thought, yeah, look, these are the people I'm going to hang out with for the rest of my life. I'm never going to go home.
So that's all it took. One club for you to be like, right, I'll put up with this murky blue sky for the rest of my life.
Well, so I don't live in Georgia still, fortunately, but I will say though that, how to put this? It's like I had known about it my entire life, but it really required the experience before I said, okay, this is what I understand. This is what I have understood. So I don't think it was the experience that brought home, this is who I am. It was, this is who I am, that reinforced why I should be at Bone Shakers. And to take that even a little further, one of the first things they told me about, probably because I walked up there and I was speaking in a deep voice and I handed them an ID that very clearly didn't say Selena on it, because one of the first things they said was, oh shoot, did you know we do a drag show on Thursday nights? And I went, yeah? And then pretty quickly, there I was up there, lip syncing to Susie and the Banshees. And knowing that, my expression of femininity was so natural, so right, so clean, so right. That was who I am, that I was Selena, and Selena was me. And an interesting, something interesting that happened with Bone Shakers is that by, I don't know, 1995, it became the place for, because there was really the only place to go dancing in Athens. I don't think there were other places. And so the Southern frat boys started showing up at Bone Shakers. And so it went from being a gay bar, to this weird amalgam. And what was great was that there was the drag scene, there was the gay scene, and then these very innocent, very naive men came in, and I gotta imagine they were just destroyed. I mean, they loved Selena because I was, 115 kilos. No, that's not right. Sorry. My math was way off. I was like 150 pounds and like 6 feet tall. I'm sorry, I'm using freedom units, everybody.
No, I
that's all I
can't
got.
convert this in my head. Yeah, I'll just go with
I
that.
haven't the slightest idea. 150 pounds. I was close to 6 feet tall. I had these lovely brocade heels that were probably 2.5-inch heels. So it was statuesque. And for some reason, I've always had, not for some reason, my transgender clinic guesses I have some intersex characteristics, but I've always had sort of a curvy hips and backside. So when I would wear a tight velvet skirt, and here I am, 6'2" or so, these frat boys loved me. And so I loved them back. None of them ever knew, presumably, who Selena was, but I would get drinks all night long. I didn't even bother getting cash out because I'm like, am I going to buy anything?
Best night.
I can get there and show up. As long as I show up about 11 o'clock, there's going to be frat boys who are going to go, oh my God, look at the gothic goddess. What are you drinking? And I would always say Long Island iced tea because it was the stiffest drink I could get and also the most expensive. And I thought if somebody else is buying it...
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to pick the expensive drink if someone else is buying it, right? You're not just going to be like, oh, a cola.
Oh, if somebody else is buying, right.
Wait, let me understand this. So it started off as a queer space, a predominantly gay bar. Then the frat boys showed up. But presumably the frat boys were showing up because they wanted women. Were there like enough women there?
Wouldn't you
Have
think?
I misunderstood what a frat is?
No. I mean, it was the fraternity, it was fraternity brothers who were looking to get drunk. And that was about it. So there were women there. And I believe it's because if you went to any other bar in town, there were a bunch of annoying frat boys who were going to come up and hit on you. Maybe that's what happened. Actually, I wonder if that's what happened, that the frat boys went, where'd all the women go? And then, oh, they're dancing at Bone Shakers? Well, then let's go there.
Okay, so if I've got this right, the straight women show up and they manhandle the drag queens and they disrespect the space. And then the straight men show up and they disrespect the straight women who are disrespecting the drag queens and manhandling the staff.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Right.
No, I think that's right. And then in the meantime, just for fun, I certainly anyway would manhandle the straight men for manhandling the straight women.
You're getting your own back, right? Like that's the reason. It wasn't hormones.
Oh no, it was certainly not hormones. No, I liked at the time my nails were pretty long. I don't wear them quite as long anymore, but my fingernails were very long, and I loved to put points on them because I was very pale and tragic and gothic. Right. Recall this.
So what do you mean points on them? Like
they were sharp. They were pointed.
Okay. I see.
To I love to say, did you ever have to do the thumb war or play thumb war?
Have to do.
I
loved the thumb war.
I know, I don't know what that was. Would you ever play the thumb war?
Yeah.
I love to do that. And, sooner or later it was a joke. Oh, go do a thumb war with, I'm going to say with her because that's the way I was. Go play a thumb war with her. And with the points on my fingernails, I could really dig into somebody's palm. And I'd have that person on his or her knees going, okay, look, you won the thumb war. We're not starting, but just let go of my hand because you're killing me. And I bring up these fingernails because what I loved to do was scratch up these frat boys. Like I would scratch them on the face, scratch them on the neck. And I would get people looking at me going, what the hell are you doing? And I would laugh and bat my eyes. And they would go, all right. And it was cool. It was whatever. Do you want another drink? Maybe if I get you another drink, you'll stop scratching me, you know. So I felt like I really came into myself there. Apparently as a bitchy California Valley girl type person.
Who took chunks out of people's skin, yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure if it's clear, but yes, in Los Angeles, much of what goes on is skin chunk taking. There's a lot of that going on.
Just like in the movies, yeah.
Right. But I had, it was a fling, not much, but I had a fling with the first transgender woman I ever knew. Had a fling with her at Bone Shakers. I certainly had my flings with men at Bone Shakers, because occasionally I would show up at Bone Shakers not dressed up as a woman. I was always worried, actually, some frat boy was going to go, "You look really familiar. Oh my God," with a nick. "Oh my God," and then beat the hell out of me, but it never happened.
Just hide your nails, yeah.
Yeah, and just the whole time keep my arms folded. What? My nails? No, I don't. But there were, I don't know, it was a time that I could experiment with everything and anything. I could experiment with the person I was. I could experiment with what I found attractive. The transgender woman I knew was beautiful. I wanted to be her as much as I wanted to kiss her.
And it being a place of experimenting and experiencing and just like being free to do things. This is like possibly a really cliche question and something that you've answered all the time. But you talked before about dressing in women's clothing, but like borrowing sisters, partners, whatever. Was going out in public in the first time in women's clothing when you went to Bone Shakers?
Oh, no. No, I was
okay.
Probably maybe 6. Certainly when I could drive places, because in California, you couldn't drive until you were 16, at least at the time. I don't know now. But I was going out in public, certainly by 16. But I would say feeling accepted, dressed up in public, that was the first time, was going to Bone Shakers. Because, I was a chemistry graduate student. And I don't know what you've heard about chemistry graduate students. Not exactly the wildest bunch. Not even close to the wildest bunch. Really more of a, would you like to pick up some chocolate milk and play some Pinochle kind of bunch. So I remember going to a party once, the first time I went to a party dressed up, because I thought this is going to be perfectly normal. If I accepted who I am, everybody else will. Certainly. Because all I have to do is tell them this is who I am. I am a pansexual transgender woman, and they will go, yeah, okay, cool. It was untrue. Just, I'll spoil the story. It was untrue. But the first time I showed up somewhere, really what they ended up doing was going, oh, she's from California. So you have to just kind of overlook really what she does. And so it was not an acceptance. It was more of my behavior was just excused by, well, she grew up in LA. What are you going to do? But going to Bone Shakers, it was completely accepted and celebrated. Yeah, I used that term earlier, celebrated. And that was what I got from Bone Shakers.
And so when did Bone Shakers close?
I did not know. It was still open by the time I left, which was in 1998. It turns out it closed in 2005, which is a shame. I don't know. I don't know if another place opened. I really don't know. I did see in the University of Georgia student newspaper that supposedly there was a reunion in 2016, but I'm curious if there is a space now, because I saw a quote in 2016, from a person who said, it'd be nice if there were a space, but I don't really need it. Wait, really? Yes, you do. Because online spaces are different.
They are very different, but I don't know. I don't know what my position is. I probably should have a position after 200 odd episodes of this show, but
You would think. Can I recommend the position of do you remember we were talking about the dance move? That can just be your position, because that's got to also play into other things that you can do. When you said position, you meant about not online.
I'm happy for you to interpret my words in whichever way.
Good. Good, thank you. Because I wasn't sure if that was going to be funny at all, but I think the energy that you can exchange, and it'll sound really woo-woo, but I think the energy that we can exchange next to each other makes a lot of difference. When I first came out as transgender, so this would have been 2022, because I knew my gender in whatever I said, 1994, whatever I said. It took almost 30 years before I actually transitioned. But the first transgender woman I stood next to after I came out was energizing. Her energy and my energy overlapped, and it was calming. I don't have a good way of saying this. I feel like I've said that about 400 times in this episode, but we need that energy. We need this human electricity that flows between us. And it's just not there.
Yeah, but do we need queer spaces in order to feel that energy?
So now I have to take a position. But I had the position before we ever started this conversation because my opinion is yes. And my opinion is yes because queer energy, to my mind, is different. And we're surrounded by mundane, what word do we want to use? A non-queer energy. See, I hate the word normal, but we're surrounded by mundane energy all our lives. And I think it's important to get into a place where the queer energy can be amplified and resonant and not overrun, because it was weird. When the straight women showed up, for some reason that didn't feel that bad. When the straight men showed up to Bone Shakers, it started to feel weird. It started to feel, I almost used the word polluted, and I think that's the right word.
There's probably no straight men listening to this, so you can say polluted, I think.
You're probably right, yeah. But it was a dilution. There was a pollution. It was different. And I think it's important for us to feel, this will come out sounding a bit odd, I think it's important for us to feel ourselves. I don't mean that in the go feel yourself sort of way.
I mean that is important, though.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, don't not feel yourself.
Don't not feel yourself, but do feel yourself. Yeah? Is that right?
Right. The combination is important. I think the ability to sense yourself through somebody else who gets you is a very, very big thing. It's part of what I talk about frequently, or write about frequently, that introspection is a huge part of who we end up becoming. You have to get some introspection or do some introspection to find who you are. But there is almost nothing compared to being seen as who you are. And it was May of 2022 that my wife saw me in a dress for the first time ever. I mean, we met in the year 2000. Our first date was in April of 2000. And I told her, hey, look, this is who I am, because I knew. And she said, oh, I'd love to see that sometime. And I thought, sure you would. But when she did, and she even took a photograph, it was so different. It's very different to tell somebody who you are and have that person feel who you are.
Actually see, yeah.
Yes. Perceive, see, and feel, and sense. And when I go out into public now, as Amethysta, because there is no other, there was never another, but when I go out now, my energy is different, and people respond to me differently than they ever would have as the person I presented before. And that's huge.
What was that like? being seen by her for the first time?
It was absolutely terrifying because even though I was aware of who I was, even though I had accepted who I was, by putting it out there, I opened myself to rejection.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. Otherwise, I wouldn't probably be talking to you now. But the possibility of being rejected is powerful. Not conforming to social expectations is very powerful. And this is part of why I think spaces, physical spaces, where you can go and know that the social environment is not one that has expectations against who you are, I think that's very, very important. I think it's, I mean, I cannot overstress
Yeah.
how important I think that is.
I guess the point that I haven't actually tried to make at all, but that is ping-ponging around in my head is, why don't we just queer all the spaces rather than be cordoned off?
I hope through your work and through my work, that's what happens. When I look at my son and the people that he knows, I'm already starting to choke up. I mean, I didn't even get a sentence in and I'm choking up. But when I look at the kids today,
Kids
I
today.
hate using that phrase too, but kids these days, when my son found out that I was transitioning gender, the first thing he said, he looked down and he was quiet. And I thought, oh shit. And he looked back up and he went, gosh, I am so glad you found what is going to make you happy. I'm going to cry now. But that is the future. I think it's easy for us to lose track of that because there are some very horrible people in the United States government, in the UK government, and they say really awful things. And they might even mean them. They might not just be running for re-election. What I cling to is that they are a minority. They are a very vocal minority and a very pain-inducing minority. But I sent out an email coming out saying, I am transgender. All those things you ever saw in the past, however long you've known me. This is why.
How long did it take you to draft that email?
Oh, I must have spent 2 hours
Oh,
writing it.
not very long. Oh, I would have spent a lot longer.
Oh, gosh. Well, see, but I write quickly. I type
Oh,
quickly.
yeah, but I would need to go away and then come back and then change a word and then overthink it. That's kind of my style.
Yeah, but that probably should have been my style too. But the thing is, so I sent it out to almost 50 people, actually.
But blind CC, right? Like,
Well,
you didn't-
yeah, I think I went through like an email service, but I sent out a PDF. Here's a process of transition. Here's what's going to happen. Here are some frequently asked questions, because the two big questions: are you going to get boobs? Are you going to get your balls cut off? I don't know what it is, but those are the two. Incidentally, my son asked those two right after saying, I'm glad you found what's going to make you happy. It was both of those two questions. But out of 50 people, I had 2 people total, one of whom I don't have contact with anymore because he got that weird, and the other one who really just wanted to confirm that the email came from me. And she ended up saying, I don't get it, but I know you, and you don't do things that aren't very well considered, so this must be very well considered. And I guess good luck. 50 people. 2 of those are my very religious, very conservative parents-in-law who call me Amy whenever I see them, gender me correctly. I'm not saying everything is great, and I'm not saying we need to stop fighting, because we do. And I think at some point the fight will get easier. Maybe I'm foolish. Probably I'm foolish. Probably I'm idealistic. But if I stop believing in that ideal, I'm going to stop fighting. And then I'm going to have to lay down and die. That went a bit dark. Sorry.
That did go dark. And I was trying to think, like, how do I bring this back to Bone Shakers? But you've just died.
No, my experience, the reason why I have this conviction now was because of those experiences. I was confirmed, not just confirmed, I was affirmed, I was validated, I was thought beautiful, I was thought sexy. All of these things were done by the time I was 24 years old. And I needed that. It's partly fueled me through the remaining 30x years. I still can't do math.
Several years.
Many, sure.
Okay, so I know what the question I want to ask is. We started this conversation with you listing 5 words to describe the 90s. Why don't we close the conversation with you giving me 5 words to describe Bone Shakers?
It was beautiful. It was sex crazed. It was affirming. It was, I'm trying to come up with the word. The best word I have, it's a phrase again. You gave me mental health, so I'll throw this
let
out.
you bend the rules once and you're just bending the rules left, right, and center.
Did you give me an inch? I'll take at least a meter. I'm not sure what imperial and metric, how those go together, but it was energetically aligning. It sounds very new age. It was something that aligned me as if I were a magnet.
Well, is that electric?
Well, if you want to go into the physics of it, right? A magnetic field does, if you have an oscillating electric field,
Yes,
you can have an orthogonal magnetic.
Oh, it could be electromagnetic. Yeah.
Yes. So you started to ask a chemist, and not just any chemist, but like an analytical chemist who specialized in electrochemistry. So you stepped in it. I'm sorry. But my last word, the last word I would use, is something I thought of actually right at the beginning before I ever told you the first word, which was beautiful. Because what Bone Shakers was to me was everything. It was the whole world to me, because it taught me who I am. It was everything.
Do you have any memories of Bone Shakers, or maybe clubbing from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, why not get in touch? I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing, but I can't do it alone. I need your help. Go to lostspacesPodcast.com, find the section Share a Lost Space, and then tell me all about what it is you got up to. I would love to hear from you. But if that's a bit too much of a commitment, I understand, you've got to fill in a whole form. You can also reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Amethysta by listening to her podcast, Gender Identity Weekly, or by visiting her website, amethysta.io. And the links to all of this will be in the show notes for this episode. Don't you worry. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on your podcast platform, or just told other people who you think might get a kick out of listening to these stories about queer lives. My name's Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.